The year is 1999. After millions of years in exile, King Baranoia, with his massive machine empire, sets his sights on Earth. To combat this threat, the UAOH has assembled 5 of their best soldiers to volunteer to become the Ohrangers. Those soldiers consist of our leader, Hoshino, O Red. Then there's Shohei, O Green, Yuji, O Blue, Judy, O Yellow, and Momo, O Pink. Then we have Riki, a teenage boy, as the King Ranger from the lost civilization known as Pangea. The interesting thing about their family names is that they are wordplays on the shapes of their visors. For example, for O Red, his family name is Hoshino, and Hoshi means star in Japanese. And that's pretty much the synopsis. The story may sound pretty basic and simple, but when you watch it, there's a lot more to it. The initial pacing will be a bit slow, but it does progress and the themes are well expanded and developed. As strange as this sounds, I feel its main weakness is of course little to no strong character development, but for reasons I feel that I can understand, which I have also explored in my review of Ohranger. Unfortunately, there were other political and social problems during the broadcast of this series, and they weren't able to expand those certain qualities, such as this whole Pangea thing between Riki and Baranoia. During the broadcast, a cult of jackasses known as the Shinrikyo gassed a Japanese subway, and they felt they originated from, the old Pangea continent, and because of that, this show kind of went to hell in a handbasket. To make things worse, a lot of the portrayals of the threat that the Empire gives off just reflected too much of the negativity going on in Japan. Just try and think about, making a Sentai series about like an post-earthquake situation with what's been going on with Japan with March 11th, and, that's what you get with this series. And it's not going to go well with the audiences. But moving back on topic, the Ohrangers are heroes by their own free will, take their responsibilities seriously, and are formally trained to do what they do. As I said before in my Ohranger review, I think it's much harder to develop these kinds of heroes as opposed to those who are heroes by circumstances or by accident. But if your opinion differs, that's cool and I would like to hear your thoughts. But the show excellently demonstrates their sense of duty, honor, responsibility, and commitment, so I commend the show for that. And it also shows how good their teamwork is and how they rely on each other. But I feel the characters are meant to drive the story as opposed to the story driving the characters. But in this context, it works perfectly well, and you can forgive the qualities that I find lacking. Also, moving on, you have no idea what the team members were like before they were Sentai fighters. At least in Ohranger and Jetman, you know what their dreams and motivations were to a more relatable sense. To me, that gave them more personality in a realistic sense, but of course, soldiers are real people too. And, they're everyday people like you and me, props to the troops. And the only backstories you get of any of the characters are just Momo and O Green. With Momo, it's about a childhood friend, and once you really think about that episode, it's a pretty fucked up episode. And with O Green, it's about how he was training to be a boxer. I thought Riki was kind of underdeveloped to a certain degree. I felt he had this great presence, but his potential wasn't fully used. But he was part of the whole Pangea backstory, and I suppose that Shinrikyo bullshit, and I hope that Asakura Shoko dies of cancer soon or something, or just gets executed finally. That bullshit just didn't allow them to explore that part of his backstory. He contributes pretty well, but just his development in the direction of his character is what's underutilized. The villains may come across as a bit silly, but they are menacing and threatening as I mentioned before. They do show harm to civilians, though not to the same extent as Jetman, and how massive the Empire is. I like how they show strength in numbers and they come across as intimidating, and the final episodes of the series demonstrates how great of a threat they are, which you have to see for yourself. So I leave the story and characters at an 8.5 out of 10. In conjunction with the Empire gimmick, the action demonstrates that they are outnumbered in a distinct way, and some of the fight scenes show ways how they have to fight multiple opponents. I don't remember the exact episode, but there is one where Hoshino jumps off a small cliff and kicks down a group of minions, as they were called Cogs and Zeo Rangers, and strikes them down like bowling pins. I heard from some of my hardcore Sentai friends that as friends that are fans, that the guy who choreographed the action for this series was one of the best, and it shows here. The mechs are pretty cool as well and have various gimmicks that both reflect Egyptian mythology and approaches a postmodern sci-fi feel. I also like how the helmet of their first mechs can combine with the main head, and they all correspond to each character's individual mech and have their own unique features. Eventually, other big mechs will be introduced, and, some are useless, some are cool, and, everything works out. For that, I give the action a 9 out of 10. The opening theme is very explosive, especially with the hook. After that, it maintains a certain speed and intensity with the instrumentals and singing, though it does slow down after the hook. I feel as a background song, it just doesn't fit with the action. The tempo is kind of broken, in my opinion, for, that kind of atmosphere. But I feel the song that defines this show is a background song called Niji Ito Crystal Sky. The beat and tempo I feel is more appropriate to the fights and feels immersing and catching even if you can't understand the lyrics. And with the song, it's like the kind of song you would use if you were like shadowboxing or in a free-form martial arts competition. And the episode of when the Go-Kaijers finally used the Ohranger powers, I'm glad that song was used when they are fighting in those suits. And I give the music a 9.75 out of 10. Well, sadly, this was a series that was almost the end of Super Sentai. Apparently, Super Sentai up until this point was considered to be at an end. I heard that has been a problem since, I think, Turbo Ranger between 1988 and 1989. The writers and producers really had no idea of its direction. The ratings weren't that great, but apparently the merchandise was okay to help this franchise. It's just that the content of the show was just too reflective of the social problems that were going on in Japan, and that killed a certain fraction of its potential. Not just a certain, but a significant. But I believe in retrospect, if you watch this years later, and you do develop a distinct appreciation for it. Artistically, in terms of the costumes and the I don't know how to say this word anymore, choreography, the series is very captivating. It does start slow, but it does pick up. I think they could have developed Ricky and the whole Pangea thing more, as I said before, but politics just didn't allow that. Despite the negative flack this series has, I personally recommend it. So and of course, my criticisms of the lack of character development, but for the right reasons. But putting that aside, I still think that this series is good enough for an overall score of an 8.9 out of 10.